Happy birthday! Today is May 24th, 2019. Construction of the CB&Q in Wyoming started 1 year ago today. I'm Mark Pruitt. To celebrate the layout's first birthday, I thought we'd take a look at this past year's journey. Here is the beginning. On May 24th, 2018, I built the first two L girders for the layout. These two went under Casper. It's early June, and we're looking at the wall where Casper will go. Panels and lights in the ceiling are barely started, and not even the stringers to support the backdrop are in place yet. In fact, we've barely started cleaning up the room at this point. In late June, about a month after building those first L girders, the room has been cleaned and the layout benchwork outlined on the floor. Though they're at best a general outline of the layout, they've been a great help at several points over the past year. And finally, at the very end of June, the first section of backdrop has been temporarily placed. After 5 weeks, this is where the layout stood. What blazing speed! But not to worry, things did start to accelerate a bit. Early July saw benchwork construction begin in earnest, with L girder table construction underway. This is the first one on the left end of Casper. Following construction of the first two tables, grid section building began, and by mid-July, the first two grids were complete. The Casper tables were moved away from the wall, and the backdrop for the entire Casper section of the layout was mounted and painted. This was pretty easy to do, since I had the backdrops already cut to size and coiled up from a previous iteration of the layout. All it took was gluing a few sections together and refreshing the paint. The next order of business, in late July, was to complete the grid for the blob end of Casper, where the engine servicing facilities and a couple of industries will go, along with the turnaround curve. A few days later, the pink foam base for this area of the layout was cut to shape and installed. And on July 28th, a major milestone was reached: installation of first track on the new layout. This was especially noteworthy because I was working on a foam base, which I'd never done before except for a little bit of scenery. By early August, track was being laid on the turnback curve, and cork roadbed was going in for the switching lead and arrival/departure track. 2.5 months after the first L girders were built, and the Casper classification track roadbed is going in. Within a couple of weeks, the yard ladder has been started. By the end of August, the classification yard was well underway, and the runaround track roadbed is partially installed. In early September, I laid out the engine servicing facility on the foam. Key was figuring out how to position the turntable so the no tracks section would not be a problem later. At this point, I needed to get the mainline installed behind Casper. I didn't want to be doing that after structures and all that were in place. Here's how I transitioned the line into the grade and raised it enough to install its own roadbed separate from the foam base. And here we see the sub-roadbed beyond the transition section. We're still in early September, and I had most of the line behind Casper installed. This Northern Pacific Malley was able to drag all those cars up the 2% grade without a hiccup. And here's that Malley slowly backing the train down the grade and into the curve towards Casper. Yes, it made it all the way into the yard without a derailment. Mid-September saw me building turnouts so I could complete the runaround track. The first few days of October saw the completion of the runaround track. The classification yard is now basically functional. The switches in the runaround track, which is to the right of the ladder, lead from the turnout closest to the camera to the engine facilities. That's the track with the logo on it. The second turnout will lead to the standard oil refinery loading racks that will be behind the roundhouse, and to a couple of other industries. The turnout in the distance goes to the reefer icing facility. Now attention switched to the engine facilities. I attached the turntable to the foam base the same way I attached the roadbed, with adhesive caulk. Here's how I weighted the turntable to hold it until the caulk dried. With the turntable installed, I was able to complete the first turntable lead on the far side in this shot. I also laid the first two garden tracks. The curve in the foreground is the Casper turnback curve, and the stub track on the left is the end of the switching lead. Still the first week in October, and work continues in the servicing facility with the addition of a garden track on the far side of the turntable. What you can't see in this picture is that all the garden tracks and the turntable itself are now powered. By mid-October, it was time to install the roundhouse floor. I decided that, rather than finishing the roundhouse on the workbench and transferring it to the layout, I would permanently install the floor and then erect the structure in place. Here my friend Walt, who has a better reach than I do, is using my hot wire foam cutter to cut trenches to clear the inspection pits. I cut a yogurt cup down and taped it to the cutter to act as a depth guide. It worked great. And while all this work is going on, I'm still installing ceiling panels in the area around Casper with my wife's help. Here she is attaching a new panel to the ceiling. In late October, I switched gears and moved from mechanical construction to scenery in the yard. Spoiler alert, the results were not what I hoped they would be. I started by covering the backdrop and track on the grade with paper, then spray painted the classification tracks at the end of the yard with Rust-Oleum brown flat enamel. This was nearly a disaster. The paint was mildly erosive to the foam. So, slight change of plan. I picked up a can of brown latex paint and painted most of the foam base, then went back and painted the track with the brown Rust-Oleum again. Much better results this time. This being a steam-area yard, I went back with an overspray of black to represent the coal, soot, and cinders that would, over years, be ground into the dirt of the yard. It's not as totally black as this picture makes it look. And now, in early November, it was back to the end of the classification tracks to install scenery and ballast. This was the first effort. Not so good. A little more work and the addition of ballast resulted in this mess. It looks worse than it really is, since in this shot the ballast glue is not dry. Even so, it doesn't look that much worse than it really was. By late November, the first attempt at scenicking a section of the yard was done with these dismal results. Clearly, I have a lot to learn. With cars on the tracks, it doesn't look quite so bad, but I still need to redo the entire area. You may have noticed that the foam base is now a yellowish tan color. I repainted the entire yard area to a color that more closely matches the soil color around the real town of Casper. With my first effort at scenery such an abject failure, I switched back to mechanical construction. At least I know how to do that. So it's back to the engine facilities and the roundhouse where the floor, at least most of it, was fitted into the grooves Walt cut into the foam. In early December, the floor was completed and glued down. If you guessed I used caulk for that, you'd be right. I only used a few dabs around the perimeter of the floor, as I want to be able to remove the roundhouse without destroying it if the layout ever has to come out. Here you can see that the first two bay frames have been installed. This shot shows us a couple of things. The soda cans are holding the rails in the roundhouse down while the super glue holding them fully dries. The one laying on its side is holding the lead track down while the caulk holding it to the foam dries. I wired up the tracks as I went, 2 or 3 at a time, and tested them as they were completed. That's why the 2 locos are sitting in the leftmost stalls. I also programmed the turntable stops as I went. By mid-December, roundhouse track installation was nearing completion, and most of the bay frames were installed. Finally, on December 22nd, all tracks are in place, as are all the bay frames. The turntable has also been fully programmed. Now it's time to erect the rest of the roundhouse. I started out by spray painting all the exterior walls. My wife was not real happy about the smell on this Christmas day. I'd been thinking about how to cost-effectively light the roundhouse. Buying a bunch of LEDs could get expensive, and wiring them all would not be a fun thing to do. After Christmas sales provided the answer. For about $5, I obtained a couple sets of battery-powered LED light strings. Perfect, I think. A little bit of work removing all the bric-a-brac attached to the LED string yielded this. I should be able to string these through the interior to good effect. After getting the lighting worked out, it was time to build the rest of the roundhouse structure. Window frames and glazing were installed on the stall and walls, and by early January I had this state of affairs. And just to show everyone that the turntable and roundhouse tracks were indeed functional, I recorded a train running onto the turntable and into one of the roundhouse stalls. If you look close, you can see the silver wire of the LED string. Still in early January, I was at this point. The right-hand wall of the roundhouse was installed, and the clerestory windows and upper door frame for the rightmost stall is in place. And that's where things stopped for about 7 weeks. I was off to China for a 6-week visit with my wife's family. Here's my wife and I near a replica of the Great Wall. Look close, pictures of me are a rarity on this channel. Returning from China, roundhouse construction picked up where it left off. By February 24th, just 3 days after our return, the roundhouse was in this state. And by the end of February, construction was basically complete. Alternating sections of the roof are affixed to the structure, with the others left loose to allow removal for access. The lighting was also complete, and with a bit of experimentation, I was able to determine an appropriate brightness level and wire the lights into layout power. I still need to fix the light leaks and install some styrene strips to keep the loose sections of roofing from sliding off, but overall it looks pretty good. And in early March, I decided to stop working on the Casper area and progress with construction out onto the main line. I began by building and installing, with my friend Walt's help, several new benchwork sections. This included, of course, new ceiling panels and lights over the new sections. Mid-March saw completion of the new ceiling sections and installation of part of the turnback curve for Northern Pacific staging. This curve is 36-inch radius. Near the end of March, things looked like this. In the far background, the high section is the beginning of the Oren-Franny interchange yard. The more sharp-eyed viewers may also notice that the peninsula protruding toward the camera has been shifted to the right from its initial position. By tweaking the track plan to reduce what became an obviously excessively wide aisleway between Casper and this peninsula provides for a slightly larger section of the Wind River Canyon to be modeled. The repositioning of the peninsula at this point was simple and only took a couple hours to complete. On the last day of March, some of the Northern Pacific track is now in place and sub-roadbed is being added for the line from Casper to Powder River and beyond at the lower level. When I extended the sub-roadbed out of Casper, I switched from a foam base back to the old tried and true half-inch plywood. There was no real problem with the foam, but after 8 or so months working with it, my comfort zone is still better with plywood. On April 1st, track was laid from Casper towards Powder River. Here, soda cans are holding it in place while the caulk dries. Here's a short test train running slowly over the newly installed track, propelled backwards by a decapod. I watched the locomotive wheels, especially the lead and trailing trucks, very closely for any odd movement that might signal an irregularity in the track. Here's a Mikado with a train posing for a photo on this new super elevated curve. Here's that same train moving around this newly laid curve. The engineer must be thrilled to be able to take a train out of Casper finally, even if it is just a short jaunt. Towards mid-April, I completed another section of L girders, taking the layout farther out from Casper. Extending the benchwork means more ceiling and lighting work. For a couple of weeks, I painted and installed ceiling panels and added lights as I plan to press on into Wind River Canyon in very short order. I'm thoroughly sick of painting those ceiling panels. At this point, it's early May and we're almost to the end of this first year. The benchwork in the near foreground is the Wind River Canyon area. Here, the canyon walls will reach to the ceiling. As you can see, I decided to forego the grid construction by eliminating the side stringers. The plywood joists, which are 3/4 inch oak plywood, are attached to the L girders using 2x2s. With all this new benchwork, track laying can continue. The second week in May saw the installation of sub-roadbed through Powder River and installation of the main line and siding. This siding will allow up to 6 stock cars to be loaded at once. Mid-May also saw the extension of the main line just past the Powder River turnout. In the third week of May, roadbed was extended past Chobon and into the south end of Wind River Canyon. Another week saw completion of the Burlington line into the beginning of the Wind River Canyon. Here's a few clips of a tank car train heading out of Casper with asphalt-laden tanks from the Husky refinery in Cody in tow, en route to an off-layout customer. This will certainly look better when scenery is in place. And so our year one journey is complete. I hope you enjoyed seeing the evolution of the layout over this past year. Heck, I hope you stuck through this entire video to the end. Don't forget to tune back in for the usual shorter monthly update videos, the next one of which is due out in about 10 days. Thanks for watching.